Oh, hey, we're live.
Yeah, welcome to the virtual brown bag. Hopefully, other people are going to join. So, here's the way it works. This is a weekly developer meetup for any developers that want to join, ask questions, share something, kind of a show and tell. Then, we generally just talk. Reminder, everything is going to be recorded, streamed to YouTube. Don't share any work product, private GitHub repo, state secrets, etc. Yeah, that's it. So how's it going, JB? You have 2 clocks behind you, which I've never noticed before.
Oh yeah, that's new for my my new remote work. So the one is for Brisbane, Australian time because I got tired of doing time zone math. Like East Coast, West Coast, that's a little bit more easy to do, but like 15 hours gets complicated math. And so I can just turn around and go, "What time is it over there?" Oh, okay. But yeah, the other clock is East Coast, just because I wanted to be cool, and now I have 2 clocks, and I'm like a newsroom or something.
You look like Wall Street. Okay, well, so I have a couple things I can share. Articles mostly, and then if we get to it, we can kind of start talking code.
Oh, one thing is, did you see the Nitrous IO? I guess is gone.
So what is a Nitrous IO?
So it was a like a competitor, I guess, to say Cloud9 sort of structure. I used them before where they have like a virtual machine in the cloud for you, so you have your own development stuff in IDE. I used them a lot for Rails girls because getting people set up on Ruby on their local laptop was a nightmare. So I'd just be like everyone's connecting to this. And I was pleased with this experience, but I don't know. I'm not a virtual machine guy, so it never was really attractive to me for a permanent development environment.
I mean, Cloud9 is great. The coding school I work with, they run entire courses out of Cloud9. So yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of that. The thing with Cloud9, just because it is so fast and you don't have to deal, like you said, you don't have to deal with other people's environments. They did just recently start having it so you could put in a credit card. You have to put in a credit card in order to get even a free account, which is kind of a showstopper for people kind of trying out our Operation Spark bootcamp course.
Yeah.
So it's a lot to ask of someone, even if they don't charge you. But what I did find out, though, was you can, they just need a credit card that validates, right?
Right.
They're not charging it unless you tell them to charge it. So, well, you know how credit cards put out testing for numbers, so you could test stuff, but the charges never go through. So you could actually take one of those numbers, put it in, and it's fine.
There you
go. I mean, again, you won't get any of the paid services, but if you don't need any of the paid services, that totally works.
Well, there you go. See, you hacked it. You went around their restriction or the plan. It's like because it had to be a business person be like, look, we really need to get the credit card. That's part of our thing. And then someone was like, but what about the free people? Yeah. And you're like, here's the solution.
Well, I mean, yeah.
Like for now.
But that is They didn't say anything about it, but it seems to be working. It's cool. Let me share a couple things. Let's see what I want to share.
So do you use Cloud9 for your development or just?
I don't really develop in it. It's fine. I like it okay. But I mean, like, it's really, really, really good for people that don't have a full development setup and don't have either the knowledge or the time to really get into it and fine tweak it and don't want to deal with it.
Yeah.
By the time they kind of graduate to it, I mean, the entire first 6 weeks of the boot camp, so these are like the courses where we train people up to be like, okay, you could do the basics of programming. Those are done entirely in Cloud9. By the time they get into immersion, which is like, okay, now we're sitting down and making you into like a mid-level developer. Those at that point, they get a developer environment installed. But yeah, you can get really, really far with just the web interfaces. Cool. Okay, so this is something I wanted to talk about because this kind of came up, and it's an interesting thing that I haven't seen people talk about very much. So I had this requirement recently on the project, and in it basically, I had to store a password. Not a user password, but I basically am integrating with a third-party system, actually in this case, Jira. So there's an account set up specifically for this integration, just to kind of pull data. And yes, they have OAuth on Jira, but the OAuth is very, very, very cumbersome. And since this account isn't really used by a person, it's kind of fine to store a password, but I still don't want to store a password in the clear. So I was trying to think through how to do that, because I mean, obviously you could use AES or whatever to do a symmetric encryption, but then where the hell do you store the key, right? You store it just in a config file on the disk. Well, then someone can just, if someone who can log into the computer and steal the database, they can just steal the key as well. A guy on our team who's a C++ guy recommended this to me. It's like, there's this crypt protect data function in Windows, which my understanding is similar to the key ring. It's kind of a very similar concept. So this is C++ function. You kind of pull it up and you look at it, and here's like an example of doing it, accessing with C#, so you can see it's doing all sorts of the interop with C# stuff, and like copying stuff into blobs and blah, 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 blah. But the way it works is kind of interesting. So what essentially happens is, here's a function you can pass any series of bytes to. A string is convertible to a series of bytes, and it will encrypt it. And what it uses as the key is either machine specific or user specific. So basically, if you're using this crypt protect data, you can encrypt the data in such a way that only people who are logged in as this user on this machine could decrypt it, which works great for a web service because it's always running as the same machine, and we don't actually need to share this bit of data in between databases or in between different machines. So it's a really, really straightforward solution. I mean, it's C++ interop, so it's not completely straightforward, but it is a very nice solution that that kind of allowed me to, I can get encryption without all the additional kind of stuff of doing it the quote unquote correct way. And now if someone, busts into the server, grabs the database, grabs all the code files and everything, well, then they try later on to decrypt it. They're not going to be able to unless they go into the machine, break into the machine a second time, and then do the decryption on that machine, which is certainly an acceptable enough risk profile for a lot of scenarios. Now, I wouldn't encrypt user passwords like this. Don't encrypt user passwords ever, but it's pretty handy for like service passwords that you don't have another, that you just need to store and you don't want to store in plain text. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
Like API? Like, I'm confused which one you're using this for.
Yeah, well, so okay, API keys. Why not? Pretty good idea to encrypt API keys anyway. Okay, let's talk about this. The technically correct. Let's say you even do have an OAuth generated API key. The technically all the way through correct way to do it, to store it, right, would be in its own freaking database with pretty much nothing else in that database. The database gets encrypted, and then so if someone breaks into the machine and steals it, then first of all, they would have to know to steal both databases, and the authentication database shouldn't even be on the same machine, and it should be like limited in network connection and so on. That's the correct way of doing it. That's also like something that your average application with like a developer setting everything up is not going to go, right? But yeah, let's say you do have some API keys or stuff like that, or just some username passwords because the API you're integrating with doesn't support OAuth. Well, this is a pretty good way to go because you get encryption. I mean, and it's not great to put it in the same database because that means anyone who has access to the database has access to this data. But it's also not the end of the world because it's really only decryptable by this one user on that machine, and someone would have to be able to log in as that and decrypt it. So yeah. I thought that was interesting. I'm sure there's a similar concept on Linux and OS X. We're talking stuff C++ guys need here, so there's probably something there as well. But yeah, just kind of trudging through this code and like, okay, I understand and clean it up. I find in general that's a great way to learn code, is just to sit and trudge through it and then just clean up everything that I disagree with. Like, I'm rewriting this. Nope, that should be an arrow function. That should be something used var instead of explicit names. But like, by the time I finish doing that, boy, do I know that code well. So yeah, so this is an interesting solution.
So that was George's Friday night. What else did people do on their Friday night?
I don't see a problem. So let me show y'all. So I have a couple other things I want to talk about. First of all, I wrote this article recently. So a friend of mine blogged. He doesn't like React.js, and he's an Ember JS guy. He's like, man, it's got conventions, and it's just so productive. And React doesn't feel productive. Everything's different, so on. So I kind of wrote this article trying to refute some of the, not so much refute some ideas because he's absolutely correct. But I think it's interesting to spawn some conversation from it. My view, as far as what React is, we basically have a couple things. First, the virtual DOM idea, right? And that's a big idea, right? The fact that, you can just generate your DOM from React and use virtual DOM directly, you end up with something that looks like this, which is really not that bad. Like, because he was like, I hate JSX. JSX is going, okay, we've talked about this. We don't have to use JSX. But I mean, even if that looks weird, then we get other hiccup, which is still essentially the same thing, but it looks like this, which is nice. Just close. Yeah, right. And kind of to that point, so virtual DOM systems have existed for a while. There was actually an article that came out. I posted in a couple places this week where one of the guys who writes code from Emacs just kind of wrote I guess he's written an extension to it or a core contribution to make its buffering smoother, because it does kind of sometimes have this weird flicker. And he kind of explains why things are the way they are in Emacs and how it's completely held together with duct tape, and it's like a system emulating another system, emulating another system, emulating another system in the 60s. But he was talking about like, hey, Emacs actually does the virtual DOM thing, just internally. It kind of does the whole thing, that exact same idea. But that idea is a good idea of kind of being able to generate a domain in memory and kind of patch it directly and control things at that level. I think one of the things that React did is they did a really, really good job just working the PR to be like, hey, developers, it's not that bad. Everyone's freaking out when React first came to the scene about the fact that they're mixing markup and JavaScript. We spent like 15 years being like, don't do that. And here they were doing that again, and they did a really, really good job of PR explaining why it's not a bad idea and kind of what the limitations are, which is really important. So there's a virtual DOM part of React, and then there's all like kind of Facebook conventions on top of it, which, sure, you might not like, right? JSX, whatever. They're kind of the way they do components and stuff like that. But when people talk about React, they kind of mean both these things together, and they are separate things. You can like one and not like the other. And then there's the whole thing with Redux as well, which is kind of a third thing that people kind of lump in there, even though it's its own separate thing as well. So kind of my thoughts on this are, when you're kind of complaining about React not having all that stuff, or for, not being super productive. Well, kind of. I mean, it's productive for some stuff. Like you could transfer knowledge between different virtual DOM systems and different React style systems very, very easily. Once you have set up a framework that's fine-tuned to your application, you can be very productive very easily. You're not going to be as productive from scratch because this is kind of where that whole thing, React's not a framework, actually kind of makes sense, right? Well, React's not a framework, so you're not going to be productive about this convention that isn't there. And that kind of, brought around, like we got into the comments and talking about it, like maybe there should be something. Like, why isn't there a full-on framework on top of React? And I kind of feel like maybe there just hasn't been. I don't know if anyone wants to talk about that some more, but that was kind of a whole thing we got into this weekend.
I read your article, thought it was good. There are, again, like, I think Reflux or something, I don't know. People have tried to create like frameworks around React. Even actually Facebook has a framework, something that they literally call a React framework. Yeah. And it just hasn't been adopted because people, I think, I find the complexity around a lot of frameworks what do we need frameworks for? Communicating with the database, like a nicer layer. All of this stuff, like React has best practices to actually like do those kinds of, how to structure it. So I haven't seen a bunch of huge use cases for like needing all the extra stuff that a framework gives you.
If you need to build the startup apps from scratch relatively long, frameworks are great, right? Sure, Angular, if you need to create a contact book one week, a to-do app the next week, and a sample mail client, the following week, Angular's swell for that. I'm sure Ember is swell for, and I believe that Ember, I've never used it, Ember is probably better in that the thing that you get is actually going to be easier to maintain going forward. So I think frameworks are great for that. Well, and then also in addition, okay, you get someone who's not a senior developer who doesn't have their opinions built up yet, is sitting down to start a new project. Well, a framework is good to force them to do that rather than kind of assembling their own thing. That's the same reason why I can't be like, tell junior devs to be like, yes, pick React for your startup. Because you're going to make some really bad decisions.
Mm-hmm.
I think there is absolutely room for it, though. Maybe Cycle.js is one. I just have not heard enough in that space. Yeah, I don't know if anyone else has.
A lot of it has to do with how you view software too, and how you build software. I will disagree strongly or whatever against the Ember guy. I'm sure me and him can't sit down and have a conversation because I've done a whole bunch of frameworks, a whole bunch of things, and I'm pretty much a framework guy, and I straight up don't get Ember and don't think it's good. And you can't say you haven't tried it, haven't done it, because people say, I start coding and show it, they're like, wow, you really know Ember, you're good with Ember, and I'm like, yeah, and I hate it.
You've done it 3 times. Because everyone that I've talked with Ember, they're like, yeah, I have to I had to try it 3 times to like really like it.
Well, I've done it for many years, tried it many times, and I think the core issue, and it really probably isn't Ember itself, it's Ember data, and the core issue has to be is like whether you view apps as CRUD, and I don't, and that is the big conflict, because if you view everything as CRUD, then that's Ember's wheelhouse. Like, if pages are like, you show a list of things, you click on this, you edit it, and then you come back, and that's all the things you do with it. That's like, Nothing else. Nothing else. Like it's just pure crud. Like, and if for simple as, let's say you're saying approving a timesheet, it's a different perspective. On one side, you can have, when I click on it, I'm approving the timesheet. So to approve a timesheet, you need to hit timesheet/3/approve, like post it to that. That's my point of view. Like, because I'm doing this action, and the approved timesheet endpoint, it's going to do stuff. That's my point, and that doesn't really fit well with Ember. You have to get different libraries, and it gets kind of weird or whatever. The Ember way to think about it is like, oh, you're approving a timesheet. Well, what you need to do is you set the approve to true, and then you're just going to put an update to this model, to timesheet. And that, to me, is bad. And so that's one of the conflicts. The other conflict to me is the idea that the data that I'm pulling in for my index is the same data that I would pull in for my show. Right. So my index to me, like, I'm not going to pull in all the records and all the fields and all the relationships. It's just going to be like the name and some basic information. But then when I go into show, I want to pull in all the information inside there. That becomes painful. You can do it. Like all these things I'll put is like, you can do these things, but it's so you're coloring outside the lines again. It gets be a pain in the ass because Ember data is going to be like, I don't need to. Because basically you go and you click, you have a list and you say, I want to show this, and you go into that. Ember data goes, I already have this record. I don't need to pull anything down. And you want to be like, no. You don't have all the information on this record. You need to pull this down again. And like, it gets weird that way. And there's some other routing thing that's funky too. I forgot, but it's weird in terms of like how to get the model to route correctly. What is it? It's like a redirect thing that's really weird. Anyway, it's stuff like that. Like you have all these weird frameworky things that, like, if you're doing stuff outside what you're supposed to do with Ember, it gets nasty. And I don't like my front. And it also pursues. I don't think my front end framework should be dictating how my back end domain and API should work. And the testing thing. I already told you my woes there. I could never get it to test right. And you can
Really?
Nah, yeah, I mean, even had a person who's very super knowledgeable about it come and pair, and we paired for 4 hours, and we couldn't get a single test to pass. And I'm like, I will be first one to say I'm not a genius when it comes to all this stuff like that, but I'm also not a dummy. And that was that night. I was like, you know what? Maybe we should switch over to React and Redux because I spent one night and I got the system set up with logins and like 7 tests passing by myself without using Redux before. That was like probably like a year ago. And so it's stuff like that where it's like why? And I said the reason why Ember is a framework and it does have all these best practices and all this stuff built in, but you have to spend all this time figuring out what it is and learning what it is and trying to. It's a black box in all these situations. React and Redux, at the end of the day, and I think this is what your point here is, it's a library and it's JavaScript. I can figure that out.
But do you think there is space for a React-based framework that's like roughly as controlling as Ember?
I wouldn't say it's controlling, but I do think there's a lot to be gained from a CLI like Ember CLI. Like being able to say React new and create a new framework that has all these folders and best practices sort of built in would be helpful to many.
Yeah.
Especially in the space you mentioned where you're like, look, I'm cranking through little small apps fast, like agencies and so forth. And
I think that's something that Brian Joseph actually worked on. Like creating that structure.
Yeah, I think this would be good. Of course, I'm even more on this side of like in more and more where I'm just like, don't even need the front end framework. What's this? Server side, baby.
And that's yeah. We're mostly in different situations, and I do understand kind of benefiting. Yeah.
Well, we have your scenario where you have the front end engineers you mentioned, and like now it's a new thing, and so front end engineers are going to do what they do, which is engineering.
Well, yeah, and that's its own problem. Kind of engineering React apps.
Yeah, and I just see Sydney mentioned that Aurelia does have a CLI, and we did some Aurelia stuff too, and I didn't mind. It felt fine. I think it says about Aurelia. Yep. Really, it felt better than see, one thing we need to do is one day, let's just do an Angular 2 day, dude. That's all we have to use it. But the stuff I see from it, I'm not too excited about. But also, I believe in giving it a shot.
Yeah.
You know?
Yes.
Maybe do you know an Angular 2 person? I don't even think I know an Angular 2 person.
I know some. Yeah, I could see that getting some of them on here.
I'll ask around and see.
Yeah.
That'd be fun to do. Just be like, okay, we're gonna do a Hello World Angular 2.
But they have to be all right. You have to like do like you come show off Angular 2 and then just be all right with getting into the business.
Yeah, and just be totally okay with the fact that we're gonna hate on you for an hour.
Yeah. I have a couple other things I want to show. This is so I've been powering through this podcast. I've mentioned it before a couple of times. The Internet History Podcast. Basically, this guy's covering basically doing all these episodes covering from the foundation, like the start of web browsers to like basically the iPad. That's his kind of mission. And he's coming out with these really amazing, excellent episodes about this, and in between he's tracking down a lot of the people involved in interviews. So right now I'm on the section where he's kind of talking about Amazon and how internet commerce came to be, and how Amazon's early days really interesting. If you're interested in what the heck happened there, I highly recommend going through listening to the episode, the Amazon episodes and the interview episodes. I'm really cool about what happened. Kind of the idea that Jeff Bezos structured this, and gives you like a whole new appreciation for it. He kind of assumed that they kind of fell backwards into what they were doing, but because that's how every company and every startup has done. But it really does seem that he actually had this idea, like Amazon has been him executing on a plan the entire time, and they've screwed up a lot. But they still, it's ultimately still like it was this plan that he came up with when he was like working at Wall Street as an analyst of start selling books online to prove the concept. Then move into like movies, and then start selling it. Then figure out logistics and start selling everything. And obviously they've done it and run in the world now. It's really, really cool and interesting, and also kind of explains what this means when people say that they have never made a profit. Also, I'll give a shout out to this episode right here, The Brief Remarkable Life of Danny Lewin. Which is I can't even believe I didn't know this story before. So this guy, there's a book about this guy, but basically this guy's he is American born, like moved to Israel when he was like a teen, goes on, becomes like a special forces, one of the like highest, most decorated special forces operatives there, quits that there, goes to MIT, becomes like a professor of mathematics. Then just kind of has this idea for an algorithm, for a caching algorithm, invents Akamai, which does like most of the CDN stuff online. Wildly successful, and then he was on one of the planes during 9/11. There's every reason to kind of, there's actually lots of reason to think that they go into there, that he kind of fought back, like on the airplane, like there was some like there was like one message from like stewardesses that like that there was a struggle up ahead, and that it was it. It was like, and unfortunately he did die on that airplane. But it's a really interesting story that, I mean, like, I can't believe I didn't know. That's just such a compelling story about all this stuff. That one, so if you only have time for one episode, I'd recommend that one.
Wow, holy shit.
But you don't have to take George's word for it, right? Do a little Reading Rainbow podcast style.
Yeah.
Or am I dating myself at that point, right?
Probably, yeah.
Reading Rainbow, none of y'all. Forget it. Forget
I remember reading Rainbow.
it.
I found this subreddit, which is explain like I am a where basically people say, ask you to explain things like you're a thing. Like explain the theory of gravity, like I'm being briefed to go on a covert operation. Or, explain what heroin feels like you're Macho Man Randy Savage. And man, is this a great Reddit. All right. And one last thing before we're completely out. This is huge. I don't understand why people aren't talking about this more. Well, I know because of the election, but the FCC just passed. Yeah. Did you read this? I posted this in the New Orleans.
I mean, I'm so on top of that because they're just so good.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. I mean, do you want to summarize it then? Because I just read this one article.
Well, just like Tom Wheeler, who nobody expected to be a consumer advocate. Like when he was hired for the Barack Obama administration, people were like, this guy spent years as a cable lobbyist. He comes from a blue-blooded background. This is going to just be another example of regulatory capture. And he has basically done the opposite, where he's recently, well, this is now he's saying that our data belongs to us, which hurts because I think Time Warner is trying to merge with, who is it? Anyways, another media, Verizon, I think. And one of the selling points of this merger was that like Time Warner would be able to use like all of this data that Verizon has, because apparently not only are you paying a ton of money for services from Verizon, but they also can sell all your browsing data, which is just insane. And they're saying, no, actually, just because you carry the information doesn't mean that you own the information on it, right? Like in the way that, like, when you make a phone call through AT&T, it doesn't give them license to like record and then sell any information that anything that happened in that phone call.
Right. My understanding is that they have to give you the option to opt in, right? Or actually to opt out. Like they can.
Yeah.
So they can't just be like, well, here's your notification. If you don't have to use us, if you can. I mean, they can't do that.
They can't slip it in the EULA, arbitration or something.
So then you might start seeing stuff like incentives where you can share your information, which is interesting.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. And they also handed down a verdict that basically said that what AT&T was doing in I think it was Nashville, I think. Which was basically they had sued I think it was the state of Tennessee because they wanted to stop this ordinance that said that if Google Fiber wants to come in, if they give AT&T notice, they're actually allowed to move AT&T's cables in the utility poles to install their own cable, their own fiber optic cable, because previously you would have to give notice, and then you would have to give the other company notice, who has no incentive whatsoever and we're talking about thousands and thousands of utility poles with no incentive for a speedy to respond speedily to your request to like move the cables. So basically making it almost impossible for any new cable provider or utility provider to come in, because every single utility pole, we're talking like hundreds of thousands in a state or tens of thousands in a medium-sized city would need a special request from the non-incumbent, from the challenger to the incumbent to move every single time they need to move some of their own wires to run these new wires in. And they were like, no, you actually, it wasn't that they're suing, but FCC commented and said that actually the case that AT&T is using, they're actually trying to use what the FCC has said previously, and they're basically saying, no, we didn't mean that, and actually we support Google Fiber in this case.
Although I will say that they also said that the private data collection stuff doesn't apply to websites like Google and stuff like that.
What?
I mean, I don't know. That was my reading of this article.
Oh, okay.
That they were like specifically targeting ISPs. So I guess in cases where Google's working as an ISP, but what if it's working as an ISP and all the other stuff? So
that makes sense. I mean, there is a difference between a provider who's like there's a difference between Google and the service they're providing. Like Facebook, for example, is free, right? I mean, and so they, like their entire business model is based around your data. Yeah. So if they was to apply to Facebook, it would basically destroy their business in America overnight, because it would be like, oh, so I just have to click this. I have to click this checkbox in order for you to use me.
All right. Well, that's all the stuff that I had to bring up.
I could show some Elixir stuffs while we're doing this.
Yeah. Well, does anyone else have anything they want to bring up before we get into Elixir World?
Yeah, before you get dragged into Elixir World.
Yes.
The future's here.
Fire away.
All right, so some things I learned this week. So one thing I know is that this is an atom, so it's kind of like a simple Ruby, and that these are, when you have this is a sigil, and the sigil allows you to do things like, actually I can say dog and cat, and it will create a list of strings, binary strings with those in. But one thing I learned is, so if we wanted to create this, which is a list of atoms, we can do this, but just add an A at the end. It's pretty cool. No one cared, but I was like, wow, that's one of those neat.
Is that like a?
It's a sigil. You can actually, it's called a sigil. You can actually make your own custom sigil. So like regular expressions also do that, I think, if I do. Let me see if that creates one.
Is that the same thing as a macro though?
Yes, it's a macro and you can make your own.
Oh.
Like the system has some built in, but then you can also make your own.
What the heck would they call them sigils?
Yeah, pretty sure. I could be mispronouncing it. Let me.
No. You're pronouncing it correctly, but like a sigil is like, a symbol in a cornfield. That's what it means to me.
Yeah. So there we go.
Or I wonder what the difference between them, like why they didn't call it.
So here, I guess this is what I learned this week was that. I didn't know that you can add an A at the end. You can make your own. Oh, I wonder, that's interesting. I know I've made my own before, but maybe since here it mentions that A is a modifier. Oh, look, you can do C, S, or A. Okay, so it'd be kind of interesting to see if you can make your own custom sigils and accept modifiers and what those modifiers do. Oh, it looks like you can. See, it looks like you can make your own there. All right, that'll be something I'll play around with. Other thing is, I knew you could do this, but I finally had a use for it, and I thought I'd showcase it anyway, which is it's called a multi-clause lambda, which is definitely like I'm sure Erlang has the same thing, maybe, I don't know, but definitely an Elixir thing that you probably wouldn't see in many other languages. So let's say we want to have a function that we'll call f, and we want to have it where, we're going to make it sort of like a factory function or whatever. Like you're going to pass in a keyword or something. We'll just call this a key. And then we're going to return different things from this. So like, let's say if you ask for, case key do, and say, hey, if you pass in a key number, we're going to return 32, 42, because we're nerds. And we're going to pass in word. We're going to say, what's the word we want to go for? How about Elixir? There we go. And you could pass in George. has opinions. And so now we have this function. If we want to call it, we do f dot, and we can pass in number. We'll just do here assert numbers equal 42. And we have word George. And then what has opinions. All right, so let's run this test that is mislabeled because I'm not using keyword list. But anyway, it passes. So this is just a normal lambda function. Now what we can do is let's turn this into a multi-clause. Should allow multi-clause. What we do instead, it was a function, and we can go. I'm trying to recall the syntax off the top of my head. I'm pretty sure we can say when you pass in number, do 42. Pass in word, do elixir, and George, who has. I think that's right. Oh yeah.
So that's okay. Okay, so that's just a simpler syntax for the case structure, or is that actually creating 3 methods with overloads?
I don't know.
I guess they're the same thing in their line.
I want to see if you can pass in different number, like you're right, like if they're different functions or how it works, because this is a different arity. So what even would occur?
Yeah, just add them or something.
Yeah. So let's just do this because I'm not going to be using them.
Well, no, the A plus B plus C.
Oh, that's true. Let's do that. Let's do that. Something like it. A plus B plus C. Because then we'll be really crazy, right? And we'll assert F2 for 1 equals 2, 7. The different arities. It makes sense to me.
Okay,
So
mixed with different arity. So it's just becoming a case statement. Okay.
and really, you're making the different lambdas, and then they pattern match which function to call based on.
But can you actually do stuff on the left of on the left? Like, okay, can you pattern match any word that has more than 7 characters?
I don't know if I can call length in a guard clause. That's how you'd match it. So you can what you call this big word. I'd try to win big greater than 7. Yeah. I don't think that's going to work. F dot big word.
You need to get rid of your arity.
Yeah. The underscore big word is used after being set. Okay, so it's, I guess, even if so, it's considered used if I use it in the guard clause. Let's check that. There's no function matching. Does length even work on a string?
Yes.
No, elixir.
No, not elixir land. I was like, because length is more going to check a list or enumerable, and a string isn't considered that. Let me see. Let's just do a little Google search. Elixir, guard, and here, I'll pull this over so we're not just length. Here we go. Binary part that could potentially be useful. See, length is going to be checking a list, and it's not that. Elixir binary part. Kernel. Kernel is your friend.
Isn't it
Checks a part of the binary.
without length? That's what it is, isn't it?
No, so your still binary part's going to be checking. You can get parts. It's like substring. That's not going to be.
Oh, but why wouldn't it be string.length? Right? Like
because it's a function. I don't think it can allow you to call string.length here. Guard call is like. I'm pretty sure it's not going to let you do that.
But isn't that the whole?
Yeah, like you can't. So guards, you can't invoke functions inside your guard clause. There's only certain things you can do, and based on that, you can check the types and stuff really easily. You can do some other comparisons between values, but yeah, like a remote function, I guess is the appropriate term. You can't do.
Do you know what the reason for this is? Like what is happening?
I don't know. Magic. Magic reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but that doesn't surprise me. You can't do that. But that's when you could do inside here and check the word size inside your function and be done with it.
Well, yeah, that's kind of the big benefit of pattern.
Do my mission. I can be. And I like condition, even though it's kind of weird. You probably can just do it as if statement. Let's get this passing, and then we can. I probably would refactor this one. Unexpected token end. Yeah, because you don't need end. And we have condition. Did I miss something? That looks good. What do y'all see?
Well, it's saying line 37. At this point, you
Yeah.
the end of everything.
Yeah, so it's just, but you know how, like, they're complaining about something else inside here. Multi-clause lambdas, you think they would allow you to have multiple things. Oh. It's not condition, it's condition do. It doesn't need an arrow.
That's
There we go.
frustrating.
Yeah. All right. So I'd probably refactor this. Then we can say if string.length too big elixir shorthand. There we go.
Okay. But then if you had multiple conditions, you'd use con.
Yeah, even it's sort of esoteric and niche. Like condition fits best when there's a lot of if else's together,
Right.
and you sort of like fall down the tree of okay, I check these things first, and eventually I'll get to else and do this.
That's a bummer. You can't do all that stuff in guard clauses.
Yeah, at first I think at first you run into that and you're like, oh, why can't I do this? You get a little bit frustrated, but then after a while you sort of get used to that, and then it's not a problem. Like you just don't write conditions that way or whatever. Or if it is a problem, what you do, you change your function signature to have like foo word and then like word length.
Well, also, like you really shouldn't have you really shouldn't have like a function that does like 17 different things based on their inputs, but like that seems like bad design overall, which I think is probably more to core of why you don't.
Well, you can have different inputs. Yeah, like a factory method, depending on the different inputs, is going to do different things.
Yeah.
That's
But
a job.
like, if you have a factory method, which first of all, that's a very specific thing. But even then, if you have a factory method, like depending on the input, it's doing like 17 different things. It shouldn't you like double dispatch to the thing that you're inputting or something like that? to create itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that. There's just better designs for that.
I guess as we run into like after a while, you learn how to fit within the system on how to do that. Another thing, learn or start messing with is about mocking in Elixir, and the pattern that I've kind of grown fond of. Let me see if I can find. I think Jose has even a block mocking. Let me see, pull it up. So, because it's sort of a big deal that there's some also complaints on how to write tests. I think there's a lot of biases carried over from the Ruby and Rails world that people are trying to write Ruby RSpecs in Elixir, and I just don't think it fits as well. Of course, I was never a big fan of Ruby RSpecs, so I'm a little bit biased there. And one of the things too, they tried doing mocking stuff, and there's some mocking I like, but there's a lot of mocking that I don't like. And so there's some complexity still there, and you can mock inside Elixir using I think the library is even called mock, but uses like I think is it called for Erlang underneath the cover. Yeah, so it uses Erlang's mech, but really you don't need it for the most part because there's ways you can mock tests, make your code more testable without mocks.
Yeah, I very rarely do use actual mocking in any language, honestly.
Yeah, and the pattern that I like now is this one right here. Mocks as local, which is great. So basically, it's like dependency injection for Elixir pattern. And so what you do, and what this is showing is saying, hey, for this my function, I have this other function called heavy work that I'm going to pass into it. And if I don't pass in anything, it's going to default to the right one. But then in my tests, I can pass in an anonymous function that can mock out the results.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is a nice little pattern because it's pretty lightweight, fits there. It's pretty clear what's working on, and it feels very functional and Elixir. The idea that I'm not that I'm passing in an anonymous function that I'm going to be changing. Just like I think it did with C# stuff too. Like we have a property that's like an action or a func, and you then overload it or change it, pass it in so that it does something different.
Yeah. Of course, the problem is then you're declaring concrete dependencies, but yeah, that's not always the worst.
Right.
A bigger pain in the ass and stuff like C# and Java and other stuff.
Yeah, C# is a little bit different because you generally will have a dependency injection framework, and it's different. That's, I guess every language is different, and certain things fit better.
Well, stop short to say you generally have dependency injection.
Yeah.
Although I did work on a project recently where they had 4, none of which were used properly.
Was one structure map?
No, there wasn't structure map in there, but there was autofac, there was Ninject, there was one that came with MVVM Lite, and then there was like one more. Oh, I think it was using SignalR's built-in stuff and stitching all of them together for no reason. They tore it all out at a tiny IOC.
This is the other mocking structure I've done, where you this is more from a system-wide environment standpoint, where you have these config variables that you pass and set up, and what you're doing is you're passing and telling it what module to actually use to then invoke the function on, so that you can I use this for like when I'm on development or even tests, and I don't want it to do something. Like make a call out to an API or whatever, queue up a job or something like that. I could configure it this way, and then in production you actually use the actual thing.
How does async stuff work with Elixir? Are they just doing callbacks basically? Or?
What do you mean, like asynchronous stuff?
Well, yeah. Like if you do a call out to Twitter API.
So when you're calling out the APIs and other stuff like that, in general, again, this is me just giving my opinion with how, not opinion, but like, I guess light experience. They're generally it's running in the Beam. So each of the things is their own little apps. So it's going to run. So from your coding standpoint, it looks completely synchronous. But from the actual implementation, it's asynchronous because each of these little B maps are talking to each other. Or processes. Actually, B maps is probably the wrong term. It's processes running into each other.
So then each process is started. Like if you need to do multiple queries to Twitter, you're starting that process. Right?
So let me open up old Sports Tradex stuff.
Yeah, it's not a big deal.
But see, like when you set up Mix and you put inside here, you have these lists of your applications. These are all the different like apps and processes run inside my OTP app. So you have Phoenix here, but then you have Phoenix Ectos, and you have Postgres. So all these different things. So like when you're like, hey, give me like displaying, a list of contests because it's Sports Tradex. So it's a list of contests. You have all these little apps that are going to be talking to each other. So you make the request, it comes in, Cowboy's going to process the request, and Phoenix is going to be listening to that. Then Phoenix is going to go, hey, I need to get data from the database. It talks to Phoenix Ecto, which is going to talk to Postgres, which then is going to return back the data, which is then going to call Phoenix HTML to generate the HTML. So you see, like, from my code standpoint, let's take it. It looks like this, but underneath the covers, it's a lot of like communication between these different processes.
So lobby, that's a like what does that actually do?
It's like an index, like it's showing a collection of.
Okay, so that's when someone tries to call the lobby.
Right. Yeah. So when they log in and they're like, "Hey, I need to see the list of contests you have running today."
So what happens if multiple people, if one of these fires and then someone else tries to pull up lobby in the meantime? Is there just another instance of this process?
Yeah, that keeps on spinning up different processes.
And that's kind of Phoenix taking care of that?
Oh, well, yeah. Well, that's the Beam in Erlang.
Well, no, right, but something has to monitor requests and say for each request spin up a new one.
Those would be, from my understanding, the supervisor processes. They're responsible for generating server requests and different apps and then spinning them up and down. But the idea between them is they're all lightweight, is that it's easy to spin up and easy to throw them away. And so that's how it goes. And so asynchronous processes too, like background jobs, EXQ, it's the same sort of thing. And here, notice we don't have one here, but let's one of my other requests. If we look here, this has even more processes going through, and one of them is HTTP Potion, which does HTTP requests. So it treats it just the same as talking to a database, like it's an asynchronous process.
And in your mix file, this is just determining, it's basically configuring your supervisors and what they need to start doing.
It's configuring your app. So of what all the processes are all working through there.
But the concept of the app is basically launching your supervisors and launch them. There's no other concept of not beyond that, right?
Right, like, and I want to say supervisors or stuff like that.
Like, is there anything else beyond that? There's nothing, you don't need to is there anything, when you say it configures your app, isn't that identical to saying it configures the supervisor tree?
No, I would say it's different because this is me, like this is still I use it, but I'm not an expert in this stuff. But because I'm pretty sure the supervisor, like HTTP Potion, probably has its own supervisor. Like each of these apps have their own supervisors for managing their own processes. That makes sense. So HTTP Potion could have code inside there that says like, look, you only spin up 2 of me. That's it. And manage how it handles failures and so forth. And then they're all OTP applications, and that's what OTP is really providing is like, hey, these are the common patterns and structures to make it so that everyone can play nice in the swimming pool, and it makes it easy to get this thing rocking and rolling. Yeah, the more I haven't dove into as much, but I have some other Elixir friends that have been diving more and more into it, and they're like, it is the more they learn about it, the more awesome it is. And that's what their point of view. The more they get into it, the more they're like, the power of Elixir is Beam. they're like the Beam is awesome, and that's what's making everything so cool.
All right, we are at the hour.
All right. And I got to talk about Elixir some, so there you go. Learned you some stuffs. Well, guys, it was fun.
Yep.
And I'll see y'all next week.
That's a good.